Hello, this is the Branches of Government, Section A, Legislative Branch Lecture. Our prioritized standard is Government Civic Standard 9. Objectively, we're going to analyze the legislative branch of the national government. There is a congressional election every even-numbered year on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, which is a fancy way of saying it's never on the first. During each congressional election, the entire House of Representatives and 1/3 of the Senate is elected. Each congressional term lasts for 2 years, beginning at noon on January the 3rd of every odd-numbered year. They're all actually numbered consecutively. We are currently on the 115th Congress, and they will be serving until January 3rd, 2019, and then it will become the 116th Congress. Each term has 2 sessions, both that begin at noon on January the 3rd, and Congress adjourns its session pretty much as it sees fit. But generally speaking, it is pretty much in session year-round. Here is the blueprint of the Capitol, if you're curious where things actually are. If you notice, facing the front, on the right side is the House of Representatives, left side is the Senate. In the middle is where the conference areas would be, and the Vice President's office when they're there. The House of Representatives is presided over by the Speaker of the House, which is currently Paul Ryan, a Republican from Wisconsin, although he is stepping aside after this term, while the Senate is presided over by the President of the Senate, which, if you didn't know, is also the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, Republican from Indiana. When the Vice President is not in charge of the Senate, they have another position that actually does that, and that is the President Pro Tem of the Senate. We'll see a picture of him in a moment. In the House, the majority party chooses one of its members to serve as the Speaker. That's commonly acknowledged to be the leader of the majority party in the House of Representatives. Again, Paul Ryan is serving that role. He is stepping down, so the next Speaker will be decided after the outcome of the next election. The Vice President automatically serves as the President of the Senate, which is an odd position because they're not actually a member of the Senate, and at times they're not even a member of the majority party. So when the next election rolls around, the President Pro Tem, or Pro Tempore of the Senate, Orrin Hatch, he's actually stepping down also. So there will be a new person that will be the President Pro Tem in charge of the Senate when Pence is not there, although there is a chance that could be a Democrat, so that could put this VP in a weird position. While the Speaker may debate and vote on any issues they might want, the President of the Senate may not actually debate and actually only votes to break ties. While Congress generally chooses its own sessions, the President may actually call Congress into a special session, which is a special meeting to deal with some type of emergency situation, is usually what it's reserved for. Members of the House of Representatives and the Senate have varying sizes, terms, and constituencies, or people they serve, of service. The House of Representatives has a total of 435 members. The House members must be at least 25 years old, have been a U.S. citizen for at least 7 years, and be a resident of the state and the district that they actually represent. House members serve a 2-year term and represent their congressional districts, which are usually about 1 representative for every 710,000 people. The seats in the Senate, the seats in the House are apportioned or distributed according to the population of each state, which is determined by the U.S. Census Bureau. Each state's number of seats is reapportioned or redistributed after each U.S. Census. We have a census once every 10 years. Our next census is 2020. Based on the current projections, that means some states are actually going to gain representatives, so these shades of green are going to gain, and these purple shades are actually going to lose representatives. If they are in the gray, it means they are staying the same, or at least are expected to stay the same. The Senate has 100 members. I'm sorry. Balance of power. So the House, and that is how many? We have more Republicans than Democrats. Red is Republican, blue is Democrat. All right. As I said, Senate has 100 members. Senators must be at least 30 years old, so they're expected to be more mature because they're 30-year-olds. Have been a U.S. citizen for at least 9 years, so you have to live in the U.S. a little bit longer, and be a resident of the state that they represent. Anywhere in the state is fine. Senators also serve 6-year terms and represent their entire state. And the longer terms, if you're curious, were intended to make the senators less susceptible to public opinion pressures and pleas of special interest groups. So the Senate is the good stuff, and the House, the Founding Fathers anticipated that was going to be the scraps and the leftovers. Each state is guaranteed 2 senators regardless of the population. All right, and by party, if it's red, it's Republican. Blue is Democrat. Purple means they have a Republican and a Democrat. There's a couple that actually have a couple green, and basically the green means that they have an independent senator, which is not a member of either party. And there's the balance of power, slightly more red than blue. Some of these things could change in the next election. The Constitution granted Congress several enumerated powers, which are powers granted specifically or explicitly to Congress in the specific wording of the Constitution. There's 27 of those powers to be exact, including the power to create federal laws and their punishments, declare war, coin money, raise armed forces, regulate commerce, establish rules of immigration and naturalization, and also the ability to establish federal courts and their jurisdictions. Congress also exercises implied powers, which were given to it by the necessary and proper clause in the Constitution. This clause, which is Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, states that Congress may make laws necessary and proper for carrying out all the other powers it was granted. Sometimes that is called the elastic clause because it is so vague that it has been stretched to basically cover most everything. The Constitution gave Congress non-legislative powers, which often serve as checks against the other branches of the government. The House of Representatives has the sole power of impeachment, which is the formal process for bringing charges of wrongdoing against government officials with a majority vote by House members. So this is similar to the idea of a grand jury. After being impeached by the House, the case is actually tried in the Senate, with senators acting as the jury. The vice president actually presides over impeachment proceedings, acting as the judge, unless the vice president or the president is on trial, and in that case, the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court actually presides over that. Government officials are convicted and removed from office if there is a 2/3 majority vote of the Senate. And the Senate also has executive powers dealing with appointments to office and treaties made by the president. All major presidential appointments, including executive or cabinet positions, federal judges, and ambassadors, must be confirmed by the Senate by a majority vote. So this kind of is the confirmation process, if you want to take a quick look at that. Treaties made by the president must be passed by a 2/3 majority of the senators that are present. And the president and the Senate can actually accept, reject a treaty. They can offer amendments to a treaty. They can offer reservations to a treaty. They can offer understandings to a treaty. So they have some leeway in what they do with that. Congress has powers serving as checks on the judicial branch. Congress has the power to create courts inferior to the Supreme Court. Also, Congress has the power to establish the jurisdiction of courts, basically determining what they're allowed to hear. And Congress also has the power to alter the size of the Supreme Court. So 9 is the custom size, although there is nothing in the Constitution that forces that to be the size. Congress also has the power to propose amendments to the Constitution with a 2/3 majority in each House of Congress. In a sense, this is a type of check against the judicial branch and rulings it might disagree with. An amendment can also be proposed if 2/3 of the state legislatures call for a constitutional convention, so they can do this without Congress. Proposed amendments can be ratified either by approval of 3/4 of the state legislatures or 3/4 of state ratifying conventions, depending on which method they actually used. Congress also has a few electoral powers, which I should also point out are very rarely used. If the Electoral College fails to select a president and vice president, then the House, voting by states, chooses the president, the Senate, voting individually, chooses the vice president. So here's an instance of one of those times that it actually did go to the House of Representatives to pick the president. If there is a vacancy in the vice presidency, both houses of Congress must approve the president's vice presidential nomination by a majority vote. This was actually passed as part of the 25th Amendment. Before that, there was actually no way to fill a vice presidential vacancy. Ooh. And also, a presidential veto may be overridden by a 2/3 majority of both houses of Congress. So here's the last time that happened. And it had to do with being able to, 9/11 victims being able to sue people from Saudi Arabia, I do believe. All right, that concludes Branches of Government, Section A, Legislative Branch Lecture. Government Civics Standard 9 was our prioritized standard, and objectively now you can analyze the legislative branch of the national government.